Anne Boleyn's execution was far more horrifying than you think. The French executioner's sword sliced through Anne Boleyn's neck so cleanly that her lips kept moving for 8 seconds after her head hit the straw. Witnesses saw her eyes blink 3 times and her mouth open and close as if trying to speak while her severed head lay on the scaffold floor. The executioner had to kick her head into a wooden box because no one else would touch it. Her body kept twitching for nearly a minute, while blood spurted from her neck in rhythmic pulses that matched her still beating heart. 3 years earlier, this same woman had been the most powerful queen in English history. She had worn diamonds worth more than most castles, commanded armies of servants, and made kings bow to her beauty. Now her corpse lay headless on a wooden platform, while her blood soaked into sawdust that dogs would later eat. The woman who had changed the entire religion of England couldn't even get a proper coffin. They dumped her body in an old arrow chest they found in the Tower of London storage room. How does a queen go from wearing a 20-pound crown to having her head kicked across a scaffold like a leather ball? The answer involves fake babies, poison plots, 6-fingered witches, and the most expensive divorce in human history. But the real horror isn't how Anne Boleyn died. It's why everyone wanted her dead so badly that they spent 2 years planning the perfect, legal murder. Anne Boleyn wasn't supposed to be queen. She was just a knight's daughter who got sent to France at age 12 to learn manners. But she came back to England in 1522, speaking 4 languages and knowing exactly how to make men beg. She had black hair so long she could sit on it, dark. Eyes that seemed to look straight through people, and a way of laughing that made every man in the room turn around. King Henry VIII first saw her at a dance where she wore a yellow dress that cost more than a house. He sent her a love letter the next day. But that wasn't even the worst part for Henry's wife, Catherine of Aragon. Anne refused to sleep with the king. She told him straight to his face that her virginity wasn't for sale. This drove Henry completely insane. He wrote her 17 love letters in 1 month, each one more desperate than the last. In one letter, he drew a heart with their initials inside and wrote, "I am yours forever" in French. The most powerful king in Europe was acting like a teenager with his first crush. What happened next changed everything. Henry decided to divorce his wife of 20 years just to have a chance with Anne, but the Pope said no, so Henry did something no English king had ever done before. He broke away from the Catholic Church, created his own religion, and made himself the head of it. He shut down 800 monasteries, stole all their gold, and kicked out 10,000 monks. All because Anne Boleyn wouldn't sleep with him unless he married her. The real horror was still coming. Anne's enemies started spreading rumors about her the moment she became queen. They said she had 6 fingers on her right hand and 3 nipples. They claimed she was a witch who could make men fall in love with her by feeding them potions made from menstrual blood and ground-up fingernails. One priest swore he saw her flying naked over London on a broomstick made from baby bone. These stories sound stupid now, but in 1533, people actually believed them. Anne made her first major mistake by not having a son. Henry had literally changed the religion of an entire country to marry her, and she gave him a daughter. The baby was healthy, perfect, but Henry wanted a boy so badly he refused to hold her. He didn't even show up to the christening. Anne tried to get pregnant again immediately. She had sex with Henry every single night for months, even when she was bleeding from exhaustion. Her ladies found her crying in bed, begging God to give her a son. But here's where it gets truly dark. Anne got pregnant 3 more times and lost every single baby. The first miscarriage happened when she caught Henry with Jane Seymour sitting on his lap. Anne ran into the room screaming and yanking Jane's hair so hard that chunks came out in air. Her fists. The stress made her bleed, and she lost the baby that same night. Henry blamed her for murdering his son with her jealousy. The second miscarriage was even worse. Anne was 5 months pregnant when she found out Henry had given Jane Seymour a locket with his picture inside. Anne went crazy. She threw furniture, smashed mirrors, and threatened to have Jane's face branded with hot irons. 3 days later, she woke up in a pool of blood. The baby was already dead inside her. The royal doctors had to reach inside and pull it out piece by piece while Anne screamed so loud they heard her outside the palace walls. What nobody knew was that Henry had already started planning Anne's death. He hired lawyers to find a legal way to execute a queen. The problem was that Anne hadn't actually done anything wrong. She went to church every day, gave money to the poor, and never took a lover. so Henry's lawyers had to invent crimes. They started by torturing her musician, Mark Smeaton, until he confessed to sleeping with her. They crushed his fingers one by one with iron screws until he agreed to say anything they wanted. The torture of Mark Smeaton was just the beginning. Henry's men arrested 5 more people and accused them all of having sex with the Queen. One of them was her own brother, George Boleyn. They claimed Anne had slept with her brother over 20 times and that they performed unnatural acts together. The evidence? A servant said she once saw George lean over and kiss Anne on the mouth. That was it. One kiss between siblings became 20 counts of incest. The trial itself was the most expensive fake trial in history. Henry spent £40,000, enough to buy a fleet of ships, just to make sure Anne would be found guilty. He brought in 26 judges, all of whom owed him money or favors. The main prosecutor was Thomas Cromwell, who Anne had once called a jumped-up blacksmith's son in front of the entire court. Now Cromwell had his revenge. He read out a list of dates when Anne supposedly had sex with different men. The problem was that on most of those dates, Anne was either pregnant, giving birth, or in a completely different part of England. But that wasn't even the worst part. They accused Anne of having sex with men just days after giving birth, when she was still bleeding and could barely walk. They said she had orgies in the palace chapel, and that she made her lovers swear on the Bible to keep quiet. Say, one witness claimed he saw Anne having sex with 3 men at once while reciting satanic prayers. Another said she kept a jar of holy water mixed with semen under her bed. These accusations were so obviously fake that even Anne laughed when she heard them. The real horror was still coming. During the trial, they made Anne sit in a chair facing 2,000 people, while Thomas Cromwell described in detail how she supposedly seduced each man. He talked about her French kissing techniques and how she would bite men's necks until they bled. He claimed she had a birthmark shaped like a strawberry on her left breast and another shaped like a crescent moon on her inner thigh. How did he know about birthmarks on intimate parts of her body? He didn't. He made them up. But the crowd believed every word because they wanted to. Anne's brother George tried to defend her, but they wouldn't let him speak. When he stood up to say something, guards pushed him back down. They did let him read a letter from his wife, but the letter was fake. Henry's men had forced her to write that George had told her Anne was insatiable in her lust, and that she needed 6 men to satisfy her. George's own wife testified against him to save her own life. She later went insane from guilt and spent her last years in an asylum screaming Anne's name. Here's something they don't teach in history class. The jury that condemned Anne to death included her own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk. He sat there and voted to have his niece's head cut off because Henry promised to give him her lands after she died. Anne looked straight at him when the guilty verdict was read. Witnesses said she smiled and mouthed the words, "I forgive you," while tears ran down his face. He still took her property the day after her execution. The judge gave Anne a choice in how she wanted to die. She could be burned alive, which was the normal punishment for women who committed treason, or she could be beheaded. But there was a catch. If she wanted the quick death of beheading, she had to sign a paper saying her marriage to Henry was never real and that her daughter Elizabeth was a bastard. Anne signed it. She gave up everything to avoid being burned alive. Henry had won completely. But wait, it gets worse. Henry was so excited about Anne's execution that he started planning his wedding to Jane Seymour before Anne was even dead. He ordered workmen to take down all the A symbols for Anne from the palace walls and replace them with J for Jane. He had Anne's portraits burned and her clothes given to Jane to wear. He even gave Jane Anne's personal jewelry while Anne was still alive in the tower, waiting to die. Jane wore Anne's favorite emerald necklace to dinner the night before the execution. The night before she died, Anne called for the tower constable and gave him a gold ring to deliver to her daughter. But Henry intercepted it. He kept the ring and never told Elizabeth it existed. Anne also wrote a final letter to Henry, begging him to be kind to their daughter. Henry burned it without reading it. He was already in bed with Jane Seymour when the letter arrived. Servants heard them laughing and saw Jane wearing Anne's nightgown, the one with French lace that Anne had worn on her wedding night. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, Anne woke up at 4 in the morning and asked for communion. She took the holy wafer and wine, then joked with her ladies that she would have a new nickname. "The Queen, without a head," she said, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. Her ladies started crying, but Anne told them to stop. She said she was going to a better place where there were no lying husbands or fake trials. She put on a grey dress with a white fur collar and pinned her hair up to make the executioner's job easy. Here's a detail that makes everything worse. Henry brought in a special executioner from France because he was famous for being able to cut off heads with one swing. English executioners often needed 3 or 4 hits with an axe. leaving the victim alive and screaming between strikes. But the French executioner used a sword and had a special technique. He would distract the victim by having someone call their name from the side, then swing while they turned their head. This way, they never saw the blade coming. But that wasn't even the worst part. Henry charged admission to Anne's execution like it was a play. Rich people paid 20 shillings for good spots near the scaffold. Poor people could watch for free if they stood far back. They sold meat pies and ale to the crowd. Children sat on their father's shoulders to get a better view. One merchant was selling ribbons that said, "The whore dies today," for 2 pennies each. He sold out in an hour. The scaffold was only 3 feet high, built specially low so more people could see. Anne had to walk past 2,000 people to reach it, all of them screaming insults. They threw rotten vegetables at her, but she kept walking with her head up. When she reached the scaffold, she had to pay the executioner herself. It was tradition. She gave him a bag of gold coins and said, "I hear you are very good. I have a little neck. It will be easy work." The executioner later said it was the only time he ever felt sorry for someone he killed. Anne's final speech was supposed to praise Henry and admit her guilt. That was the deal. If she said anything bad about the king, they would torture her daughter. So Anne stood there and said Henry was a gentle and sovereign lord, while the crowd laughed. She knew they were laughing. She knew everyone knew she was lying, but she said it anyway to protect Elizabeth. Then she forgave everyone, including the judges who condemned her and the witnesses who lied. She even forgave Henry, though she didn't say his name. The real horror was still coming. Anne knelt on the scaffold, and one of her ladies blindfolded her with a white cloth. But the executioner played a cruel trick. He had hidden his sword under the straw, and while Anne knelt there praying in Latin, he whispered to his assistant in French to create a distraction. The assistant called out, "Bring the sword!" from the other side of the scaffold. Anne turned her head toward the sound, and in that split second, the executioner grabbed his hidden sword and swung. The cut was so perfect that Anne's head flew 3 feet through the air before landing. Her body stayed upright on its knees for several seconds before falling sideways. Blood shot from her neck in huge spurts, covering the executioner and several people in the front row. One witness wrote that the blood was so hot it steamed in the cold morning air. Anne's eyes really did blink, and her mouth moved like she was trying to finish her prayer. Whether this was conscious or just muscle reflexes, nobody knows. But it horrified everyone who saw it. What happened next was pure chaos. The crowd rushed forward to dip handkerchiefs in Anne's blood. People believed the blood of an executed person could cure diseases. They fought each other to get closer to the body. Guards had to beat them back with sticks. Meanwhile, Anne's ladies were trying to collect her body parts. They wrapped her head in a white cloth, but blood kept seeping through. They had to use 3 cloths before it stopped. But here's the detail that nobody talks about. There was no coffin waiting for Anne because Henry hadn't bothered to order one. The guards didn't know what to do with the body. Anne's ladies begged them to wait while they found something suitable, but the guards said no. They had to clear the scaffold for the next execution, so they found an old arrow chest in a tower storage room. It was too short for Anne's body, so they had to bend her legs to make her fit. They shoved her head in beside her feet. The horror wasn't over. Henry found out that Anne's ladies were planning to give her a proper burial in a gold casket. He sent soldiers to stop them. The soldiers burst into the tower chapel and literally grabbed the arrow chest from the priest's hands. They buried Anne under the chapel floor without any ceremony. No prayers, no marker, nothing. Just a hole in the ground with a box containing a headless queen. They didn't even record exactly where they buried her. Today, nobody knows for sure where Anne's body is, while Anne's body was being dumped in the ground. Henry was already celebrating. He went hunting in Epping Forest and had a picnic with Jane Seymour. When a cannon fired to signal that Anne was dead, Henry shouted, "The deed is done! Bring me wine!" He got drunk and sang songs about being a free man. That night, he gave a party that cost £3,000. They roasted 6 oxen and 20 sheep. Henry danced until 3 in the morning while wearing a yellow doublet, the same color Anne wore when he first fell in love with her. The next morning, Henry proposed to Jane Seymour. He gave her a ring worth £10,000 that he had commissioned while Anne was still alive. Jane said yes, immediately. She had been practicing her surprised face in a mirror for weeks. They got married 10 days later in the same chapel where Henry had married Anne. Jane wore a white dress covered in Anne's jewels. She sat on Anne's throne, ate from Anne's golden plates, and slept in Anne's bed. The only thing different was that Jane was smart enough to have a son. But the real horror was still coming. Anne's daughter Elizabeth was only 2 years old when her mother died. Henry declared her a bastard and kicked her out of the palace. She had to live with servants who called her the whore's brat and made her sleep in the attic. They gave her one dress to wear and fed her scraps. The little girl who should have been a princess was treated worse than a servant's child. She didn't even know how her mother died until she was 8 years old, and overheard 2 maids talking about it. What nobody expected was that Elizabeth would grow up to become the greatest queen England ever had. She ruled for 45 years, defeated the Spanish Armada, and made England the most powerful country in the world. She never married, saying she was married to England. But the truth was, she never got over what Henry did to her mother. Elizabeth wore a ring with Anne's portrait hidden inside until the day she died. She kept it secret because even 60 years later, people still called Anne Boleyn a whore. The last twist is the darkest. When Elizabeth became queen, she ordered Anne's enemies dug up and burned. She had Thomas Cromwell's bones ground into dust and scattered in the Thames. She destroyed every copy of the trial records she could find. She never tried to find her mother's body. She never gave Anne a proper grave or monument. When asked why, Elizabeth said, "Some things are better left buried." She knew that if people found Anne's body, they would desecrate it. Even in death, Anne wasn't safe from the hatred Henry had created. 300 years later, Victorian renovators found a skeleton under the Tower Chapel floor. It was a woman with a very small neck, buried without a coffin. They thought it might be Anne, but they couldn't be sure because so many people were buried there. They reburied the bones in a new box, still not knowing if it was really her. Today, tourists throw flowers on a marker that might or might not be Anne Boleyn's grave. Nobody knows for certain where the woman who changed English history is buried. But here's the final horror that puts everything in perspective. Henry had Anne killed because she couldn't give him a son. He broke from the Catholic Church, started a religious war that killed thousands, and executed his wife, all for a male heir. But Henry's precious son Edward died at 15 without having children. The throne went to Anne's daughter Elizabeth, who became the greatest monarch in English history. If Henry had just waited, if he had stayed with Anne, Elizabeth would have inherited anyway. Every single death, every torture, every lie was for nothing. The French executioner who killed Anne never took another job. He said Anne's eyes haunted him until he died. He told his son that in the moment before he swung the sword, Anne smiled at him. Not a sad smile or a frightened smile, but a real smile like she knew something he didn't. Like she could see the future where her daughter would rule England, and history would remember Henry as a fat tyrant who killed his wives. The executioner died believing Anne Boleyn cursed him with that smile. Today, people claim to see Anne's ghost walking the Tower of London, carrying her head under her arm. Security guards report seeing a woman in a grey dress who vanishes when they get close. Others have photographed strange lights in the shape of a woman near the chapel. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, 500 years later, people still can't forget Anne Boleyn. The woman Henry tried to erase from history became the most famous queen who ever lived. Her execution was supposed to be the end of her story. Instead, it was just the beginning.